The Velrothi Dominion had ruled over 3,000 star systems for 12,000 years, and in all that time, no species had ever refused their demands. No civilization had ever stood against their fleets. No world had ever survived their wrath without bending the knee and accepting the chains of servitude that came with survival. Emperor Kethalar, the Undying, sat upon his throne of black crystal, a monument carved from the core of a dead world. And he listened as his scouts delivered their report about a small blue planet on the edge of the galaxy. A world called Earth by its inhabitants. A world populated by creatures who lived barely 100 years and spent most of that time fighting among themselves. They have only achieved interstellar travel within the last 2 centuries, the scout commander reported, his scale shifting from blue to gray in submission. And they possess fewer than 50 colonies scattered across nearby systems. Their military technology is primitive compared to our own. Their ships are slow and their weapons are weak. The Emperor laughed, and the sound echoed through the vast throne room like thunder rolling across mountains, causing every courtier and servant to tremble where they stood. 40 colonies, Kethalar repeated, amusement dripping from every word. And they call themselves an interstellar species. How delightful. Send the 7th Fleet. Give them the standard terms. They will kneel, or they will burn. Across the galaxy, in a place the Velrothi considered insignificant, humanity had no idea what was coming for them. They were busy with their own concerns, building new colonies, exploring new worlds, arguing about politics and economics and all the small matters that filled their short lives. The United Terran Council met in a great chamber on Earth, a building of glass and steel that overlooked the blue waters of the Atlantic Ocean. And they discussed trade agreements and territorial disputes and the endless details of governing a species spread across dozens of worlds. Admiral Lyra Chum sat in her chair and listened to the debates with half her attention. She was 60 years old, with gray streaking her black hair, and she had spent 40 years in the Terran Defense Force. She had seen humanity grow from a single world to a spacefaring civilization. She had watched them reach for the stars with hope and wonder in their hearts. She did not know that hope was about to be tested in ways none of them could imagine. The first sign of trouble came 3 months later, when a ship appeared at the edge of the Sol system. It was not human. It was not anything humanity had ever seen before. It was vast and angular, covered in symbols that glowed with strange light. And it broadcast a message on every frequency. "I am Ambassador Yevron of the Galactic Concord," the message declared. "And I come bearing urgent news for the species known as humanity. I request an audience with your leaders." The Terran Council agreed to meet with the alien ambassador, and 3 days later, Yevron stood before them. He was tall and thin, with 4 eyes that blinked independently and skin that looked like cracked leather. He walked with a cane that seemed to be made of living wood, and his voice was soft and sad. "I have traveled a great distance to deliver this warning," Yevron said, looking around the chamber at the human faces staring back at him, "because I believe your species deserves to know what comes for them. The Velrothi Dominion has noticed your existence, and they have sent a fleet to claim your worlds." Murmurs rippled through the chamber, voices rising in confusion and fear and anger. Who are these Velrothi? One counselor demanded, and what gives them the right to claim our worlds? Yevron closed all 4 of his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them again, they were heavy with sorrow. "The Velrothi have ruled this region of the galaxy for 12,000 years, he explained, and they do not ask for rights. They do not negotiate. They do not compromise. They arrive with their fleets, and they give you a choice. You can surrender and become their servants, or you can resist and be destroyed. There is no third option. There never has been. How many species have they conquered?" Admiral Chun asked, her voice calm and steady. "Thousands," Yevon replied. And the ones who resisted. The ones who fought back. Their worlds are now dust. Their people are now memories. Their names are now forgotten. The Valrothi do not simply defeat their enemies. They erase them. They wipe away every trace of their existence until it is as if they never lived at all. The chamber fell silent, and in that silence, fear began to spread like poison through water. What do you suggest we do? The council president asked. His voice barely above a whisper. Yevon leaned forward on his cane, and his 4 eyes looked at each human in turn. Surrender, he said simply. Accept their terms. Become their servants. It is not a pleasant existence, but it is existence. You will survive. Your children will survive. Your species will continue, even if it is in chains. That is more than many civilizations can claim. Admiral Chun stood, and every eye in the chamber turned to her ambassador Yevon. She said, her voice cutting through the fear like a blade. I thank you for traveling so far to deliver this warning. I understand you believe you are helping us. I understand you have seen the Valrothi destroy countless species, and you wish to spare us that fate. Yevon nodded, hope flickering in his ancient eyes. But I must tell you something about humanity, Chung continued. Something you need to understand before you leave this chamber. We are not a species that surrenders. We are not a species that kneels. We have faced extinction before, from ice ages and plagues and wars and disasters that nearly wiped us from existence. And every single time, we have survived. We have fought. We have refused to accept that our story was over. She walked toward the ambassador, her boots echoing on the marble floor. You tell us the Valrothi are powerful. You tell us they have never been defeated. You tell us resistance is futile and surrender is our only hope. But I tell you this, ambassador. Humanity has never met a challenge we could not overcome. We have never faced an enemy we could not defeat. And we have never, not once in our entire history, accepted that we were helpless. Yevon stared at her, and something in his ancient eyes shifted. It might have been admiration. It might have been pity. You do not understand what you are saying, he whispered. You do not know what the Valrothi will do to you. Admiral Chun smiled, and it was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a predator that had just spotted its prey. No, ambassador, she said. They do not know what we will do to them. Thank you for your concern. You may leave now. Yevon left Earth that night, and as his ship accelerated away from the blue planet, he looked back at the world that had just refused to save itself. Brave fools, he muttered to himself. Brave, beautiful fools. May whatever gods you believe in have mercy on you, because the Valrothi will not. The galaxy watched and waited for Earth to burn, because that was what always happened when someone defied the Valrothi. That was how the story always ended. But humanity had never been good at following the scripts that others wrote for them, and they were about to remind the galaxy why that made them dangerous. Fleet Commander Zorvath stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominance, and watched the stars streak past as his fleet traveled through hyperspace toward the small blue world called Earth. 800 warships followed behind him, each one bristling with weapons that could crack continents and boil oceans. It was more firepower than most species ever saw in their entire history. We will arrive in the target system within 6 hours, his second-in-command reported. All ships report ready for combat operations. Zorvath allowed himself a small smile of satisfaction. This would be an easy conquest. The scouts had reported that humanity possessed fewer than 200 warships, and most of those were small patrol vessels barely worthy of the name. This would not be a battle. It would be a slaughter. It would be a reminder to the galaxy of what happened to those who caught the Valrothi's attention. Prepare the standard ultimatum, Zorvath ordered. We will give them one chance to surrender before we begin the cleansing. The Emperor wants this done quickly and efficiently. 6 hours later, the Seventh Fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system. And Zorvath immediately knew something was wrong. The system was silent. There were no patrol ships challenging their approach. There were no defensive satellites scanning their fleet. There were no panicked communications begging for mercy. The orbital stations around Earth appeared dark and empty. The colonies on Mars and the moons of Jupiter and Saturn had gone completely quiet. Where are they? Zorvath demanded, his scales shifting to an angry red. Where are their ships? Where are their defenses? Unknown, Commander, his sensor officer replied, confusion evident in his voice. We are detecting no significant power signatures in the system. It is as if they have simply abandoned everything. This was wrong. Zorvath had conquered dozens of species in his long career, and he knew how prey behaved when predators arrived. They panicked, they fled. They begged and pleaded and offered everything they had in exchange for their lives. They did not go quiet. They did not disappear into the darkness and wait. It is a trick, Zorvath decided. They are hiding somewhere, hoping we will pass them by. Foolish creatures. Scan every asteroid. Check every moon. Find them. The fleet spread out, moving deeper into the system, sensors searching for any sign of human activity. They found nothing but empty stations and abandoned outposts. It was as if humanity had simply vanished into the void. The trap sprung when they reached Neptune. Admiral Chun had spent 6 months preparing for this moment, and she had learned everything she could about Varathi tactics and technology. She knew they were arrogant. She knew they expected easy victories. She knew they would spread their fleet out to search for the humans they believed were hiding. That arrogance would be their downfall hidden. Weapons platforms erupted from the moons of Neptune, their camouflage systems shutting down as they opened fire with everything they had. Stealth frigates materialized from the darkness of space, their engines blazing to life as they launched torpedoes at the Varathi ships. Mining vessels that had been converted into kamikaze bombers accelerated toward their targets with human crews who knew they would not survive, but did not care. And from behind the ice giant itself, the Terran defense fleet emerged. Every ship humanity possessed, every weapon they had built, every soldier they could spare. It was everything they had, thrown against an enemy that outnumbered them 4-1. Open fire. Admiral Chun commanded from the bridge of her flagship, the Indomitable. Hit them with everything. Make them bleed. The battle lasted 11 hours. Zorvath had never experienced anything like it. The humans fought with a ferocity he had never seen from any species. They used tactics that made no sense to him, sacrificing ships to take out larger targets, ramming their vessels into his when their weapons failed, refusing to retreat even when victory was clearly impossible. They are insane, he screamed as another of his battlecruisers exploded under concentrated human fire. They are completely insane. Why do they not surrender? Why do they not run? But the humans did not surrender, and they did not run. They fought as if their very existence depended on this moment. They fought as if losing was not an option they could accept. They fought with a fury that seemed to come from something deeper than mere survival. When the light of explosions finally faded, 340 Varathi ships drifted as burning debris. The Eternal Dominance had lost half its escort. Zorvath himself had been wounded when a human frigate had rammed his flagship's bridge. The humans had paid a terrible price for their victory. Over 130 ships destroyed. Thousands of lives lost. Their fleet reduced to a battered remnant that could barely hold formation. But they had won for the first time in 8,000 years. A Varathi fleet had been defeated in open battle. Admiral Chun looked at the tactical display, at the burning wreckage that filled the space around Neptune, at the shattered remains of her fleet. She felt exhausted and hollow. But beneath the exhaustion, she felt something else. Something that burned like fire in her chest pride. "Send a message to Earth," she ordered, her voice hoarse from hours of shouting commands. "Tell them we won. Tell them the Velrothi can bleed. Tell them we are still here." Across the Sol system, on every colony and station and ship, humans received that message. And for the first time since the Velrothi had been spotted approaching their home, they allowed themselves to hope Commander Zorvath retreated with his surviving ships. And as he fled toward Velrothi space, he composed his report to Emperor Cathalar. It was the hardest thing he had ever done in his long military career. He had never reported a defeat before. He had never had to admit that a primitive species had bested him in combat. The Emperor received the report in his throne room, surrounded by courtiers who watched in terrified silence as he read the details of the battle. They expected rage. They expected execution orders. They expected Zorvath's name to be added to the list of failures who had been erased from Velrothi history. Instead, the Emperor smiled. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a hunter who had finally found worthy prey after a lifetime of hunting animals that could not fight back. "Finally," Cathalar whispered, and his voice echoed through the throne room like the promise of thunder. "Finally, a species worth breaking. A species that fights. A species that makes victory meaningful." He stood from his throne and walked to the great window that overlooked his capital city, a metropolis that stretched to the horizon on every side. "Summon the War Council," he ordered. "Mobilize the full armada. Every ship. Every soldier. Every weapon we possess. I want the planet crackers. I want the sun killers. I want the bioweapons that can unravel their genetic code." His advisors stared at him in shock. The full armada had not been mobilized in 5,000 years. It was overwhelming force beyond anything any enemy had ever faced. "My Emperor," one brave advisor ventured, "surely that is excessive for a single species with barely 50 colonies. Surely a smaller force." Cathalar turned, and his eyes blazed with cold fire. "They defeated my 7th fleet," he said softly. "They killed my soldiers. They made us bleed. They must be punished. They must be broken. They must be made an example that will echo through the galaxy for the next 10,000 years." He looked back out the window at his empire, at the power he commanded, at the worlds that trembled at his name. "Earth will not simply be conquered," he declared. "It will be destroyed. Every human will die. Every trace of their civilization will be erased. 1,000 years from now, no one will remember they ever existed. That is my decree. That is their fate." The full armada began to mobilize, and the galaxy held its breath. Humanity had won their first battle, but the real war was only just beginning, and the price of their defiance was about to become terrifyingly clear. The second Velrothi invasion was not a battle. It was an extinction event. It was the end of everything humanity had ever built. It was death coming for them on wings of fire and hatred. 12,000 warships entered the Sol system, and the sky itself seemed to darken with their presence. Planet crackers, the size of small moons, followed behind the main fleet, weapons designed to shatter worlds into fragments. Sun killers hummed with terrible energy, devices that could destabilize a star and turn it into a weapon. Bioweapon carriers held viruses engineered specifically to attack human DNA, to dissolve human flesh, to end human life in the most painful ways the Velrothi scientists could imagine. Admiral Chen looked at the tactical display and felt her heart turn to ice. There was no way to fight this. There was no strategy that could defeat such overwhelming force. Everything they had thrown at the 7th Fleet, every trick and trap and desperate gamble, would mean nothing against an armada that stretched across the void like a tide of destruction. "What are your orders, Admiral?" her first officer asked. And his voice trembled despite his best efforts to stay calm. Chun closed her eyes for a moment, and in that darkness, she saw her grandchildren playing in a garden on Earth. She saw her daughter laughing in the sunlight. She saw everything she loved and everything she had sworn to protect. "We fight," she said, opening her eyes. "We fight for every inch. We fight for every hour. We fight for every breath. We make them pay for every step they take toward Earth. We do not surrender. We do not give up. We do not stop fighting until we cannot fight anymore." The outer colonies fell in days. The brave soldiers stationed there knew they could not win, but they fought anyway, buying precious hours for civilians to evacuate toward Earth. They died screaming defiance at the Velrothi ships that destroyed them. And their sacrifice was not forgotten. Mars held for 3 weeks. Protected by the orbital defense grid that humanity had hastily constructed after the first battle, millions of soldiers fought in the red dust, using the canyons and mountains as cover, striking at Velrothi forces and then vanishing into the landscape. When the Velrothi finally overwhelmed them, they found that the humans had rigged the colony domes to explode. Taking thousands of invaders with them into Death Luna became a graveyard. The ancient lunar bases that had been humanity's first step into space were reduced to rubble and ash. The Velrothi planted their flag in the crater where the first human moon landing had occurred. A deliberate insult to everything humanity had achieved, and then the siege of Earth began. Emperor Cathalar personally commanded the final assault, watching from his flagship as his forces surrounded the human homeworld. He wanted to see the fear in their eyes. He wanted to watch them break. He wanted to savor their despair as everything they loved was destroyed. But humanity refused to give him that satisfaction. They had retreated to Earth. Yes, but they had not given up. They had fortified every city. They had dug bunkers deep into the mountains. They had hidden weapons caches in every forest and every desert and every ocean floor. They had turned their homeworld into a fortress. And they prepared to defend it to the last human standing. Admiral Chun commanded the defense from a bunker beneath the Himalayan mountains, far below the surface where the Velrothi bombardment could not reach her. She had lost her left arm in the battle for Mars, and the prosthetic replacement ached in the cold underground air. But she ignored the pain and focused on the screens that showed the positions of enemy forces. They are landing troops in Europe, her tactical officer reported, and in Asia and Africa and the Americas. They are attacking on every front simultaneously. Then we defend on every front, Chun replied. Every soldier knows what they are fighting for. Every civilian knows what happens if we lose. We do not need to defeat them. We only need to survive long enough. Long enough for what? The tactical officer asked. Chun smiled grimly. Long enough for Project Prometheus. Deep beneath the surface of Earth, in laboratories that did not officially exist, scientists worked without sleep. They had been given an impossible task. Create a weapon that could turn the tide of the war. Create something that could destroy the Velrothi fleet. Create a miracle. Dr. Sarah Kim led the team, and she pushed them harder than they had ever been pushed before. She had lost her husband in the battle for Mars, and her grief had transformed into cold determination. She would build this weapon. She would give humanity a chance. She would not let her husband's sacrifice be meaningless. The calculations do not work, one of her scientists complained. Exhaustion making him careless with his words. The energy requirements are impossible. We cannot generate enough power to make this function. Then find a way. Kim snapped. Find a way or we all die. Find a way or everything ends. Find a way because there is no alternative. Do you understand? Above them, the siege continued. Velrothi forces pushed deeper into human territory with every passing day. Cities fell and burned. Millions died in the fighting or in the bombardments or in the bioweapon attacks that turned entire regions into mass graves, but humanity held. They fought in the ruins of their cities. using the rubble as cover and the underground tunnels as escape routes. They ambushed Velrothi patrols and vanished before reinforcements could arrive. They planted bombs and set traps and refused to accept that they were beaten. The siege lasted 2 years. 2 years of bombardment that lit the sky with fire every night. 2 years of starvation as the Velrothi blockade cut off all supplies from the ruined outer colonies. 2 years of horror as families huddled in bunkers and listened to the sounds of war above them. 2 years of death and suffering and unending darkness. But humanity held Admiral Chun broadcast a message on the anniversary of the siege. And her words were heard by every human still alive on Earth. "They want us to kneel," she said. And her voice was rough from the damage her lungs had taken from chemical weapons, but it was still strong. Still defiant. They want us to accept that we are small, that we are weak, that we do not matter. They want us to believe that our existence depends on their mercy, that our survival requires our submission. She paused. And in bunkers across the world, humans lean closer to their screens, desperate for hope. "We are humanity," Chun continued. "We walked out of caves and touched the stars. We survived ice ages and plagues and wars that nearly destroyed us. We have faced extinction before, and every single time we have refused to accept it. We have fought. We have survived. We have continued." Her voice hardened, became steel wrapped in fire. "We do not kneel. We do not break. And we do not forget. The Velrothi believe they can erase us from existence. They believe they can make the galaxy forget we ever lived. But they are wrong, because we are building something in the darkness below. We are creating something that will remind the galaxy why humanity should never be underestimated." In her laboratory, Dara Kim watched the broadcast on a small screen, and tears streamed down her face. She looked at the weapon they had been building for 2 years, the impossible device that was finally, miraculously complete. "It is ready," she whispered into her communicator. "Project Prometheus is ready. Tell the Admiral we can begin whenever she gives the order." Admiral Chun received the message. And for the first time in 2 years, she smiled. "Prepare for Operation Prometheus Rising," she ordered. "It is time to show the Velrothi what happens when they corner humanity. It is time to remind them that the most dangerous creature in the universe is one that has nothing left to lose. The darkest hour was ending, and the dawn that was coming would burn brighter than any sun." The Velrothi called it the day the stars screamed. Emperor Kethalar stood on the observation deck of his flagship, watching the bombardment of Earth continue as it had for 2 years. The human resistance was weakening, finally, and soon he would land on their world and personally oversee the execution of their leaders. Soon this tiresome species would be nothing but ash and memory. "My Emperor," his sensor officer called out, and there was something strange in his voice. Something that sounded almost like fear. "We are detecting unusual energy signatures rising from multiple points on the planet's surface." Kethalar turned, irritation flashing across his features. "Explain." "I cannot," the officer admitted, his scales shifting to gray with confusion. "The readings do not match anything in our databases. The energy patterns are unlike anything we have ever recorded. It is almost as if reality itself is being bent." Before the Emperor could respond, the first Prometheus warhead detonated. It did not explode like a normal weapon. There was no flash of light, no wave of fire, no shock wave rippling through space. Instead, space itself seemed to fold inward, collapsing into a point of absolute darkness that swallowed everything around it. 30 Velrothi warships simply ceased to exist. They did not burn. They did not break apart. They did not leave debris. One moment they were there, weapons firing, crews living and breathing. The next moment they were gone, erased from reality as if they had never existed at all. Then the second warhead detonated. And the third. And the fourth. 30 weapons in total. launched from hidden silos across the Earth and accelerated to impossible speeds by the same technology that powered their destructive cores. 6,000 Velrothi ships vanished in a single hour. The screaming came from the survivors, from the crews who watched their comrades disappear into nothingness, from the soldiers who felt the fabric of space twist and tear around them, from the Emperor himself, who stared at the destruction of his invincible armada with eyes that could not comprehend what they were seeing. "What is this?" Cathalor whispered, and for the first time in his ancient life, his voice trembled. "What have they done? This is impossible. This technology was banned millennia ago. No species should possess this knowledge. No species could have developed this, but humanity had developed it. In 2 years of desperation and genius and sacrifice, Dr. Kim and her team had done the impossible. They had harnessed the energy of collapsing spacetime itself. They had built weapons that could erase matter from existence. They had created something the galaxy had forbidden because it was too dangerous, too powerful, too terrible, and they had used it without hesitation. Admiral Chun watched the tactical display as the Velrothi fleet dissolved, and she felt nothing but cold satisfaction. 2 years of siege. 2 years of watching her people die. 2 years of horror and starvation and endless bombardment. The Velrothi had shown no mercy, and now neither would humanity. "Launch the second wave," she ordered. "Target the remaining capital ships. Destroy their command structure." The surviving Velrothi ships broke and ran. They did not retreat in good order. They did not cover each other's withdrawal. They simply fled, every ship for itself, desperate to escape the weapons that turned their mightiest vessels into nothing. Emperor Cathalar's flagship was one of the last to leave. He stood on his observation deck and watched as more of his ships disappeared into the hungry darkness of the Prometheus weapons. His hands shook with rage and fear, and something he had never experienced before. Helplessness. "This is not over," he snarled as his flagship accelerated toward hyperspace. "This cannot be over. I am the Emperor. I am undying. I will return with more ships. I will destroy these vermin. I will." But his words were empty, and somewhere deep inside, he knew it on Earth. The silence after the battle was almost deafening. For 2 years, the skies had burned with bombardment. For 2 years, the ground had shaken with explosions. Now there was only quiet, and the faint light of stars that humanity could see again for the first time in so long. Admiral Chun emerged from her bunker and looked up at the night sky. She was 72 years old now. Her hair had gone completely white during the siege. Her body was covered in scars, and her lungs were damaged, and her left arm was metal. But she was alive, and her people were alive, and the enemy was gone, for now Dar Kim joined her, and together they watched the stars in silence. "What happens next?" Kim asked finally. Chun was quiet for a long moment before answering. "They will be back. The Velrothi Empire still exists. Their home world is still intact. Their emperor is still alive. They will rebuild their fleets and return to finish what they started. Then we have accomplished nothing," Kim said, despair creeping into her voice. "No," Chun replied, and there was iron in her tone. "We have accomplished everything. We have proven that they can be beaten. We have shown the galaxy that the Velrothi are not invincible. We have bought ourselves time to prepare for what comes next." She turned to face Kim directly. "But we cannot simply wait for them to return. We cannot simply rebuild our defenses and hope. We must take the war to them. We must strike before they can recover. We must finish what they started." Kim stared at her. "You mean invade the Velrothi Empire?" "I mean destroy it," Chun said simply. "Completely. Utterly. Permanently. I mean ensure that they can never threaten humanity again. I mean make an example so terrible that no other species will ever dare to challenge us." We barely survived their invasion. Kim protested. We do not have the ships or the soldiers or the resources to attack an empire that spans 3,000 systems. Chun smiled. And it was the smile of a woman who had seen too much death to care about anything except victory. We have something better, she said. We have Prometheus. And we have 2 years of rage and grief and hatred burning in the heart of every human who survived this siege. Give me 1 year to rebuild our fleet. Give me 1 year to recruit and train soldiers who want revenge. And I will lead them into the heart of the Velrothi Dominion. She looked up at the stars again, and her eyes were cold. They wanted to erase us from existence, she said softly. They wanted to make the galaxy forget humanity ever lived. They failed. And now I am going to show them what it really means to be erased. 1 year later, the Terran Reclamation Fleet launched from Earth orbit. 150 warships, each one carrying Prometheus weapons. Crews of soldiers who had lost families and friends and homes to the Velrothi siege. Commanders who had fought in the ruins of their cities and watched their people. Admiral Chun stood on the bridge of her new flagship, the Vengeance, and addressed her fleet one final time before they jumped into hyperspace. For 2 years, we defended our home against an enemy that wanted to destroy us. For 2 years, we bled and suffered and died. But we survived. We held. We proved that humanity cannot be broken. Her voice rose, filled with cold fire. Now it is their turn. Now they will know what it means to face an enemy that will not stop, that will not surrender, that will not show mercy. We are going to tear their empire apart. We are going to shatter their fleets and burn their worlds and hunt their emperor to the ends of the galaxy. She paused, looking at the faces of her officers, seeing her own hunger for vengeance reflected in their eyes. The Velrothi wanted to make humanity an example of what happens to those who defy them. We are going to make them an example of what happens to those who threaten us. The hunter has become the hunted. And this hunt ends only one way. The fleet jumped into hyperspace, streaking toward Velrothi space, toward revenge, toward a reckoning that would reshape the galaxy forever. The war was far from over. But for the first time, it was the Velrothi who should be afraid. The fall of the Velrothi Dominion took 17 months. In the first month, the Terran Reclamation Fleet struck at the outer systems, hitting supply depots and communication relays and military installations. The Velrothi had expected humanity to cower on their damaged homeworld, to lick their wounds and pray for mercy. Instead, human ships appeared in their territory like ghosts of vengeance, striking without warning and vanishing before reinforcements could arrive. In the second month, humanity began targeting shipyards. Every facility that could build or repair Velrothi warships was marked for destruction. Prometheus weapons tore through orbital stations like fire through paper, erasing thousands of years of accumulated technology in flashes of collapsing space-time. By the third month, panic had spread throughout the Velrothi Dominion. Species that had been conquered millennia ago began to rise up, sensing weakness in their masters. Rebellions erupted on hundreds of worlds, stretching Velrothi forces thin and creating chaos that the human fleet exploited. Ruthlessly, Emperor Cathalar raged from his throne room, issuing orders that became increasingly desperate and contradictory. He demanded counterattacks that his admirals knew were suicide. He executed commanders who brought him bad news. He refused to accept that the impossible was happening, that his eternal empire was crumbling around him. Admiral Chun led the fleet personally, and she was merciless. She did not accept surrenders from Velrothi military forces. She did not negotiate. She did not offer terms. When her ships arrived in a system, they destroyed every military target and then moved on to the next. She was not fighting a war. She was conducting an erasure. In the 6th month, the fleet reached the Velrothi core systems. And the real slaughter began. These were the oldest and most heavily defended worlds in the Dominion, protected by fortresses that had stood for 10,000 years and defended by soldiers who had never known defeat. But they had also never faced Prometheus weapons, and they had never faced humans who had nothing left to lose. The Battle of Karth Prime lasted 3 days. The Velrothi threw everything they had at the human fleet, and for a while it seemed like they might actually stop the advance. Their weapons pounded human ships, and their soldiers fought with desperate courage, and their commanders used every trick they had learned over millennia of conquest. But it was not enough. On the 3rd day, Admiral Chun ordered a concentrated Prometheus strike on the Velrothi defensive line, and 30,000 Velrothi soldiers simply ceased to exist. The survivors broke and fled, and the human fleet poured through the gap and fell upon the worlds beyond. World after world fell. Some were destroyed outright, their surfaces scoured clean by weapons that left nothing behind. Others were occupied by human marines who methodically eliminated every trace of Velrothi presence. Libraries were burned. Monuments were demolished. Records were erased. It was as if humanity was trying to undo the very existence of their enemy. In the 12th month, the fleet reached Velroth itself, the ancient homeworld of the Dominion, the seat of imperial power for 12,000 years. It was a world of impossible beauty, covered in cities of gleaming crystal and gardens that had been cultivated for millennia. It was the heart of everything the Velrothi had built. Admiral Chun looked at it on her tactical display, and she felt nothing but cold satisfaction. Begin the bombardment, she ordered, for 3 days. The Terran fleet hammered Velroth from orbit. Prometheus weapons erased the great cities. Conventional weapons shattered the crystal towers. Drop pods carrying human soldiers descended to the surface to hunt down survivors and eliminate any resistance. Emperor Kethalar had retreated to his throne room, surrounded by the last of his loyal guards, waiting for the end he knew was coming. He was 10,000 years old, and he had ruled the galaxy for most of that time. He had seen species rise and fall. He had destroyed civilizations on a whim. He had believed himself immortal and invincible and eternal. Now he listened to the sounds of human boots echoing through his palace corridors, and he understood that he was going to die. The doors to his throne room exploded inward, and Admiral Chun walked through the smoke and fire with a squad of Marines at her back. She was old and scarred and broken in 100 ways, but her eyes burned with a fire that made the Emperor's ancient blood run cold. "Emperor Kethalar the Undying," she said, and her voice was calm and cold. "Your empire has fallen. Your fleets have been destroyed. Your worlds have been conquered. You are the last. There is nothing left." Kethalar rose from his throne, and despite everything, he managed to summon some of his ancient dignity. "You cannot kill me," he said. "I am undying. I have survived for 10,000 years. I will find a way to return. I will rebuild my empire. I will." Chun raised her weapon and fired. The Emperor of the Velrothi Dominion died screaming in his throne room, and with him died the last hope of his species. When it was over, humanity gathered the Galactic Concord to deliver a message. Representatives from 100 species assembled on a neutral station, and they watched as Admiral Chun addressed them through a holographic projection. "The Velrothi Dominion no longer exists," she announced, and her voice echoed through the assembly hall. "Every world has been conquered or destroyed. Every fleet has been eliminated. Every record has been erased. The species that once ruled 3,000 systems is now extinct." Murmurs rippled through the assembled aliens. Shock and fear, and something that might have been awe. "You will remove them from your star maps," Chun continued. "You will delete them from your histories. You will never speak their name again. 1,000 years from now, scholars will find ruins in that region of space and wonder what happened. They will never know. No one will ever know. She paused, and her eyes swept across the alien faces staring at her. Let this serve as a lesson, she said, her voice dropping to something barely above a whisper, but somehow carrying to every corner of the hall. Humanity did not want war. We did not seek empire. We only wished to exist in peace. We asked for nothing but the chance to live and grow and explore the stars like any other species. Her voice hardened, but when forced to fight, we do not simply win. We do not simply defeat our enemies. We erase them. Completely, utterly, permanently. We unmake everything they ever were until the universe itself forgets they existed. She leaned forward, and every alien in the hall felt the weight of her gaze. Remember this. Remember what happened to the Volrothi. Remember that the same fate awaits any species that threatens humanity. We are not conquerors. We are not tyrants. We have no desire to rule this galaxy. But we will defend ourselves and our people against any threat. No matter how powerful, her final words hung in the air like a promise and a warning. The last empire that challenged Earth was erased from every star map. Let there not be another. 300 years later, a young Corvani scholar named Yessa discovered strange ruins on a dead world at the edge of explored space. The architecture was massive and ancient, covered in symbols she did not recognize. The technology was advanced beyond anything her people possessed. An entire civilization had existed here, and now nothing remained but dust and silence. She brought her findings to her mentor, an ancient being named Torval, who had lived through darker times and remembered things he rarely spoke about. What happened here? Yessa asked, her eyes wide with curiosity. Who were these people? What destroyed them? Torval's tendrils went pale, and his multiple eyes flickered with something that looked like old fear. No one, he whispered, and his voice trembled. They were no one. They never existed. You did not find this place. You do not remember these ruins. If you are wise, child, you will delete your research and never return here. Yessa stared at her mentor, confused by his reaction. I do not understand. Surely this is a significant discovery. Surely we should study these ruins and learn about the species that built them. Torval grabbed her arm with surprising strength for such an old being. You do not want to know, he hissed. Trust me. There are some things the galaxy has chosen to forget for very good reasons. There are some lessons that are not meant to be unlearned. Leave this place alone. Leave these ruins to the dust and the silence. And never, ever ask about them again. Yessa looked at her mentor, at the terror in his eyes, at the way his whole body trembled with remembered fear. And slowly, she began to understand. She deleted her research that night, erasing every scan and every image and every note she had taken. She filed a false report claiming the expedition had found nothing of interest. She never spoke of the ruins again. Some lessons, she realized, were not meant to be unlearned, and somewhere in the galaxy, humanity continued to grow and explore and reach for new stars, knowing that their safety was guaranteed by a simple truth that every species in the galaxy had learned. The last empire that challenged Earth had been erased from every star map, and no one wanted to be next.